Class. So this is class 2 for the week of March 30th. This is a video for our first look at the play Doubt, a Parable by John Patrick Shanley. First of all, sorry about the previous video. You had to look at the top right corner and see a disheveled professor in his basement, a very unsightly looking basement. That was not my intent to film that way. But I kind of hit the wrong button on the software that I've been using. So apologies for that. The video didn't quite turn out how I'd hoped. Hopefully it didn't get too much in the way of the lecture. So I think I've rectified it this time around. And I just want to start by saying that, again, as with No Exit, I was happy to find that the play Doubt is available in full text. So on the go to course materials and then content under course documents, I posted the full text of the play. So if you click on that, you'll be taken to a PDF of the text of the play. So again, with the idea that maybe not everyone has the book with them, I'm going to be using this particular PDF version and page numbers in reference to this edition so that we're all on the same page. So I'm just going to start, and something else I should note too, I've been promising shorter videos and they keep turning out the same length, so a second apology for that. I will try to keep this one shorter. This one is not linked to a quiz of any kind. I thought I'd give everybody a break there. So this is just some general comments, some lecture notes as we begin this. This also should run with about the first half of the play or so. Or it's okay if it's a little less, but there is a writing journal and a discussion post assignment connected to this. So you can complete those after this lecture, or it's okay if you've already completed them. I want to start with a little bit of just historical context here. Doubt is our most contemporary reading. Out of all the things we've read, we started in ancient Greece in the 4th century BC. We've got one more play to read after Doubt, Death and the King's Horseman, but that was first staged in the 1970s. Doubt is our only 21st century text. It was written by John Patrick Shanley in the early 2000s. I believe it was first staged in 2004. And this is significant for a couple reasons. One, it's significant in terms of time because even though it was staged and written in the early 21st century, the play is set in the 1960s. And as we go along here, I'll be commenting on why Shanley might have chosen 1964 as the date, or rather the year of the setting of the play. The second reason it's significant is because of what was going on in the world when Shanley was writing this play and what he was very likely responding to. Now, he actually claims that this was not something that he was directly commenting on. However, this is a play, if you've read the first half of Doubt, you know by now that this play is about a Catholic priest named Father Flynn, who may or may not have an improper sexual relationship with a student in his parish, an altar boy in his parish, Donald Muller, and he's been accused by the principal of the school, Sister Aloysius. In 2002, I'm gonna just show you this from a basic Google search. In 2002, the Boston Globe, one of their sort of special investigative units called Spotlight, published on January 6, 2002, really a sort of an article that had resounding effects throughout the world, and the title was "A Church Allowed Abuse by Priest for Years." And this was dramatized in a really excellent film named Spotlight. This is the Wikipedia page. You can see over here it's got a pretty great cast, and the film was released in 2005. And as you can see, it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. So it's a pretty fantastic film and very true to what was going on at the time, which was this, as I said, this small investigative team of reporters who unearthed this decades-long cover-up by the by the church, by the Catholic Church, in which they would, if they got wind of a Catholic priest doing essentially what Father Flynn was accused of doing in the play, sexual abuse, they would relocate him or do some sort of something to basically hide the fact that he did this, as opposed to bring him to justice. So this was very much in the news. It was sort of in the air at the time in the 2002, 2003, and this is right around the time when Shanley himself was writing the play Doubt. So even though he dismisses this connection, this association, it's hard not to acknowledge that this was likely an influence, at least in some way or other. This was likely an influence on Shanley when he was writing the play. Okay, so I want to begin our look at the play by actually looking at a preface that Shanley had written for the publication of the play. This goes back to one of our discussion points from Trifles about how plays of the modern era, particularly the 20th and 21st century, take on more of the role of literature as opposed to performative work. And this is something, obviously, that if you were to have watched Doubt, have been an audience member at a live performance of Doubt in 2004, 2005, when it was being first staged off Broadway, you wouldn't have had access to this preface. So this is a readerly edition, and it should be paid attention to. So Shanley begins by asking the questions: what's under a play? What holds it up? So in other words, he's sort of investigating the idea of how does a playwright, how does someone like Shanley himself, where does he get the idea for a play? How does he structure it? What is the foundation for a play such as this? So clearly, as we would take his lead and assume that this play is about doubt in some way or other, one of the things that I think we all probably can agree on is that typically the word doubt has a negative connotation. In my last video, when we were looking at No Exit, I was saying how the word existential often has a negative connotation because it's often existential crisis, existential threat. The word doubt often has a negative aspect to it as well. Somehow, if you're in doubt, that shows like a weakness in you, that you're not, O ye of little faith, right? If anybody's heard that phrase before. There's also, this is from the play Othello. Othello, another one of Shakespeare's plays, speaks these words, and he's married to Desdemona, and in the course of the play, he becomes suspicious of her, that she's cheating on him. And he utters these lines in Act 3 before he's presented with what he thinks is really sort of hard evidence that she is in fact cheating on him, when in reality she wasn't. Othello says, "To be once in doubt is to be resolved." In other words, as soon as that suspicion enters your mind, as soon as there's the possibility that someone is treacherous or someone is disloyal to you, then they could never, ever gain your trust again. This is at least from Othello's point of view. But, Shanley's asking us in this preface to think about doubt in a more positive way. I make the connection to, like, when you teach a child, and we certainly have done this with our children. When you teach a child to have doubt, it's more like skepticism. You want a child to have a healthy skepticism about the world. So, for instance, you take them to the soccer field and you tell them, all right, look, grandma's going to pick you up at this time. If somebody comes up to you that you don't know and they say, oh, your mom and dad told us to come pick you up, should you believe them? No, of course not. If it's a stranger, you'd never believe them. That's having skepticism. That's healthy. That's good. That protects you. Here's another way that doubt can be a positive thing. So here's Shanley. What is doubt? Each of us is like a planet. There's a crust which seems eternal. We are confident about who we are. If you ask, we can readily describe our current state. I know my answers to so many questions, as do you. What was your father like? Do you believe in God? Who's your best friend? What do you want? Your answers are your current topography, seemingly permanent, but deceptively so. Because under that face of easy response, there is another you. And this wordless being moves just as the instant moves. It presses upward without explanation, fluid and wordless, until the resisting consciousness has no choice but to give way. It is doubt, so often experienced initially as weakness. There's that negative connotation that changes things. When a man feels unsteady, when he falters, when hard won knowledge evaporates before his eyes, he's on the verge of growth. The subtle or violent reconciliation of the outer person and the inner core often seems at first like a mistake, like you've gone the wrong way and you're lost. But this is just emotion longing for the familiar. Life happens when the tectonic power of your speechless soul breaks through the dead habits of the mind. Doubt is nothing less than an opportunity to re enter the present. So, there's some pretty powerful words there about the value of doubt, how it can shake your easy assumptions, the things you think you know. And sometimes when you challenge the things you know, that can be very productive. And that's what Shanley's arguing for here. And I said before that there is some significance to the fact that this play is set in the year 1964. Again, talking about, we're also concerned now with, sort of this unstoppable virus that's raging through the world and our country, and we talk about moments in a society and history when you have to reevaluate. And certainly in the year 1964, none of us were alive, myself included, at that time, but our parents were, our grandparents were, and they remember in 1964, it was soon after John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. It was a time of great doubt in this country. And he says here, Shanley does, I've set my story in 1964 when not just me, but the whole world seemed to be going through some kind of vast puberty. So the world as it is was sort of growing up, was going through that moment of doubt because of what happened with Kennedy. And that's something that Father Flynn references in scene 1, which we'll get to shortly. Another biblical allusion here, or a biblical reference that we should keep in mind, this is a famous moment when Jesus is on the cross, and most of us don't always think of this line, but this is an important line that Jesus utters soon, not too long after he dies. But he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is actually the only line in the New Testament that appears in 2 different Gospels. I just gave you one reference here, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verse 46. And this is important because Jesus here is showing doubt. He knows why he has to die. He tells his disciples the night before the entire plan. But here it's important that we recognize that Jesus has a moment of humanity. He's God, but he's also human. And in this moment, even though he knows what he must do, he has this moment of doubt. So this is also an important context for what Shanley is giving us here. The last thing I want to say, just as a preview of things to come, is go back up. We see that the play title is Doubt, a Parable. And parable was Jesus's main mode of teaching. The parables of Jesus make up a crucial part of the Bible. This I'm just getting from this website here. Jesus had the wisdom to simplify the profound spiritual truths he needed to share with humanity in the form of relatable stories that are easy to understand. A parable is a tale about simple, common subject to illustrate a deeper, valuable moral lesson. The source definition of the word parable means a placement side by side for the purpose of comparison. So clearly, Shanley is trying to teach us something in this play. He wants us to put this side by side as a comparison with something. And I think that part of what he's discussing is the growing up, this moment of doubt, these growing pains that we're having, that we can use as productive, that we can move past and get to some sort of greater understanding. Okay, the last thing I want to trace with you here in this opening lecture on doubt is where the suspicion comes from that Father Flynn has had an improper relationship with one of the students in his parish, Donald Muller. So the suspicion comes from the principal, Sister Aloysius, but how does she develop that suspicion? So we're going to start with scene 1, and we're going to begin with the stage directions here. Our priest, Father Flynn, in his late 30s, in green and gold vestments, gives a sermon. He is working class from the Northeast. So our stage directions here are a little bit more than what we get in Antigone and Macbeth, but a little less than what we get, for instance, in Trifles, or even for that matter in No Exit. And that's typically true throughout the play. There's a few keywords here and there on how characters are delivering lines, but not much in the way of explanatory comments. But scene 1 derives directly from the preface that that Shanley puts in this play. All right, in which he discusses how doubt can be a positive thing, moving from a space of uncertainty, but developing, growing, changing, inspecting one's own facile assumptions, and coming to a greater understanding, particularly of one's faith. Well, in this opening scene, Father Flynn gives a sermon to his congregation, and it's exactly on this topic. He even says it right here at the start. What do you do when you're not sure? That's the topic of my sermon today. You look for God's direction and can't find it. I mentioned that the context here, the time period is important. 1964, last year when President Kennedy was assassinated, who among us did not experience the most profound disorientation and despair? And he gives this. He gives a few. Remember that parable, right? That's our context for this entire play. He gives a few sort of mini parables. He says, imagine that you're on looking at the world through a window. On one side of the glass, happy, untroubled people. On the other side, you. Something has happened. You have to carry it, and it's incommunicable. For those so afflicted, only God knows their pain, their secret. So there's one way of thinking about being isolated, being alone, experiencing doubt, is looking through a window where everyone on the other side of the window seems like they're happy and you feel different from them. The second mini parable he gives within this sermon is about a sailor who has separated from the rest of his crew, and he's after a cargo ship sank, he's on a raft. He doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't have any way of knowing his direction. He says, for the next 20 nights, he floated on the vast ocean. He could no longer see the stars. He thought he was on course, but there was no way to be certain. As the days rolled on, he wasted away with fevers, etc. Had he set his course right? Was he still going on towards his home, or was he horribly lost or doomed to a terrible death? No way to know. So he makes these two comparisons to kind of hammer this point home to his congregation. There are those of you in church today who know exactly the crisis of faith I describe. I want to say to you, doubt can be a bond as powerful and sustaining as certainty. When you are lost, you are not alone. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. All right, so now we have no further context for this, right? We imagine he's the only one on stage. We don't see the congregation. He's just one character, and his sermon here is monolithic. In other words, there's no there's a common theme here, and there's no room for response of any kind. Scene 2 then changes. We now go to Sister Aloysius and Sister James. Sister Aloysius is described as a woman in her 50s or 60s. She is watchful, reserved, and unsentimental. Sister James is much younger. She's in her 20s, and she's a novice, as this dialogue establishes. She doesn't. She's still early in her career. She's just become a nun. She's a teacher, and Sister Aloysius is essentially giving her advice. And her main concern is here. Sister Aloysius tells her, you are a very innocent person, Sister James. And she's afraid that the students will take advantage of such innocence. So that tells us a lot about Sister Aloysius. She is, this is a great example here. So we're talking about one of the students named William London. And Sister Aloysius notes that William London had a ballpoint pen. He was fiddling with it while we waited for his mother. He's not using it for his assignments, I hope. And Sister Jane says no. Sister Aloysius, I'm sorry I allowed even cartridge pens into the school. The students really should only be learning script with true fountain pens. Always the easy way out these days. What does that teach? Every easy choice today will have its consequence tomorrow. So this is a great example of the kind of outlook that Sister Aloysius has. She is the classic nun that you probably have heard about from if your parents went to Catholic school, your grandparents, that they used to hit them with rulers on their knuckles, right? So she's the sort of the hardcore, rigid, all about discipline. Anything that doesn't follow that sort of paradigm is considered a weakness. Even in her teaching, she tells Sister James, do not idealize Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I do not approve of making heroes of lay historical figures. If you want to talk about saints, do it in religion. So she's very careful not to exhibit any kind of weakness from the point of view of the students. Now, this gets to Father Flynn pretty soon. So, sorry, just arrowing down here. All right, so keeping in mind the sermon that Father Flynn gives in scene 1. Now, again, even though Father Flynn would be the only character on stage that we would see if we were in the theater watching this, apparently Sister James and Sister Aloysius were part of the congregation. So Sister Aloysius, this is scene 2, asks, "What do you think of Father Flynn? Oh, he's a brilliant man. What a speaker." Yes, his sermon this past Sunday was poetic. He's actually very good, too, at teaching basketball. I was surprised. I wouldn't think a man of the cloth, personality type for basketball, but he has a way. Very natural with dribbling and shooting. What do you think that sermon was about? This past Sunday, what was he talking about? Well, he was talking about doubt. Why? Excuse me, sister? Well, sermons come from somewhere, don't they? Is Father Flynn in doubt? Is he concerned that someone else is in doubt? I suppose you'd have to ask him. No, that would be inappropriate. So right here, it's very subtle, but she's laying the groundwork for their own doubt, their own suspicion of Father Flynn. Now, you would also imagine that a woman like Sister Aloysius, who's in her 50s or 60s, she's been at this parish for a very long time. Father Flynn is new. He's of a working class background. He's young. He has different ideas, which you see play out later. She would, I think, naturally be suspicious of someone like him. Sister Aloysius is all about the old right way of doing things, tradition, and Father Flynn has new ideas. So she naturally, I think, would be suspicious or threatened by someone like that. Her job, as she sees it, is to make sure that the students pass through school, don't trip up, don't have any difficulties along the way, and that's her job, is to make sure. She calls herself like the guardian at the gate, and her job is to keep the wolves away from the students, right? All right, so now this is, I really love the rhythm in the early scenes here. We kind of vacillate between these monologues by Father Flynn and these dialogues between Sister Aloysius and Sister James. This goes to show that, I think, in the Catholic Church, the Catholic priest's word is incontestable, right? So even though in scene 3 we see Father Flynn holding basketball practice, there are no actual other characters on the stage. This is just Father Flynn speaking to these boys that if you were in the theater, you'd have to imagine them on the stage. And he talks to them very familiarly, right? He look at the way he ends. He's given them some lessons about basketball, about shooting foul shots, but he's also talking about how they should manicure their nails, how they should talk to girls. And the way he ends it is probably something that is now that what we know about what's happened in the Catholic Church and how children have been taken advantage of, he ends by saying, all right, you guys, what am I going to do with you? Get dressed, come on over to the rectory, have some Kool-Aid and cookies. We'll have a bowl session, which, it's kind of 1960s parlance. We don't really say that anymore. It's like basically, we'll just talk about what's ever on our minds. So that, again, you don't typically think of priests and school children having that sort of familiar relationship. So that might just be him, kind of trying to establish a new sort of feel in the parish, but to someone like Sister Aloysius, that would be very, very problematic. All right, now scene 4 is the scene in which their suspicion of Father Flynn comes out really in full force. Right, so it comes known that, and Sister James reports this to Sister Aloysius, that Donald Muller has been expelled from the altar boys. And early on, she says that Father Flynn has taken a special interest in Donald Muller. Donald Muller is the only African-American student at this parish. This is in New York City, the Bronx, in 1964. As it says here, most of the parish is made up of Italian and Irish families, and Sister Aloysius is sure that Donald Muller's safety is in danger. But Father Flynn is his protector, to use Sister James' word. As Sister James says, he's taken an interest since Donald went to the altar boys. I thought I should tell you. Now, there's really no sense of malice here, but look at the way Sister Aloysius takes Sister James' words. I told you to come to me, but I hoped you never would. Sister James says, and maybe I shouldn't have. Sister Aloysius, I knew once you did, something would be set in motion. So it's happened. And that is like Othello's line, once in doubt is to be resolved. So Sister Aloysius knows, has a conviction at this point that that something untoward is happening between Father Flynn and Donald. Sister James is more innocent. She's more willing to look, and particularly of a priest whom she seems to idolize, Father Flynn. She can't even imagine that this is the case. But so I think what Shanley gives us in these opening scenes, I'm gonna try to cut it off here because there's plenty more to investigate. And the scene that really I want to I'm going to pick up on in the next video is scene 5. Scene 5 is really sort of brilliant in the way that the suspicion or the accusation, I should say, comes out against Father Flynn. There's so much subtext, so much going on underneath the surface that we really should investigate. But I want to just end this video by saying that Shanley never gives the reader or the audience member a clear picture of what actually happened. One of the most fascinating things to me in this play is that the child whom we assume is the victim, and you see a little bit of this discussion toward the end of scene 4. Sister James suggests, why don't we just ask Donald Muller what happened? Sister James says that he came into her class, there was alcohol in his breath. Why don't we just ask him? Sister Aloysius says, who? And she says, the boy, Donald Muller. And Sister Aloysius dismisses that right away. He'll deny it. Why? Shame. You can't know that. So Shanley, the only characters in this play are the two nuns, Father Flynn and Donald Muller's mother. There are no children characters in this play, which mean that Donald Muller is never a character in this play. And so we can never go to the source, right? We can never go and get Donald Muller's side of the story. All we ever get are these two implacable forces. Sister Aloysius is very set and rigid in her ways, but up against the force of Father Flynn, who is a man, who is a priest, and as much of the dialogue suggests in the early portion of this play, the church is hierarchical. As a woman, as a nun, she can't go against him. She can't call him out, and there's no way for her to tear him down, and so she has to kind of deal with that throughout the entirety of the play. But both of these characters are sort of now set in this battle of wills, and it comes to the fore in scene 5, which is really a brilliant scene, and I want to talk about that more at length in the next video. But for now, I think it's really just important to establish that we are left in doubt in the same way that Shanley wants us to remember that doubt can be a productive experience. The reader, though I think a lot of times in my experience with my students, a lot of people believe that Father Flynn did do it. I'll maintain that throughout the play, and this is not a spoiler, I don't think, but throughout the play, Shanley never gives us clear evidence one way or another that it did happen or it did not happen. And he forces us to kind of be in that uncomfortable, unknowing spot and trying not to make an assumption, trying not to come down on one side or the other, but just look at what happens in front of us and try to grow through this process, understanding the characters, their points of view, their circumstances, and be as sympathetic to all sides as possible. So I'm going to end the video here. Thanks again for sticking with me, and more to come. But this is the end of Class 2 video for the week of March 30th. More to come next week. Thank you.